Hello, hello, hello. Hope so. You and I are back on mic, and we are returning to the Imperial Raj universe by Leckie for a little short story today.
That's right.
So we just completed Ancillary Justice on the podcast feed. Over the course of 3 episodes, we covered Leckie's incredible award-winning book. I think it's safe to say that we both loved it and enjoyed our time with it.
Yep.
And so for today, we wanted to visit some more writing from Leckie, and we wanted to try and stay within the Imperial Raj universe. And lucky for us, it turns out that Leckie does have a short story collection that's been published under the title Lake of Souls. And there's a number of short stories in here that actually span the course of her universes that she's created over her writing career. But there are a couple of short stories that take place within the Imperial Raj universe. And so for today's little bonus conversation episode, we figured, hey, let's read one of these short stories. We kind of skimmed the 3 of them that are in the book and picked the one that seemed most interesting. This one's called Night's Slow Poison.
That's right.
So that's what we're going to talk about today.
And I will say about this story, Night's Slow Poison, it's actually the first, both chronologically and in terms of, I guess, when Leckie wrote it in the Raj universe.
Whoa!
So this story she penned when she was attending the Clarion West Writers Workshop, where a lot of kind of phenomenal writing has come out of, and it wasn't published until 7 years later in 2012.
Wow.
Which is just really interesting. So for any of you amateur writers out there, just know, get your work out, and it might take a while, but it can blossom into a much larger universe, and maybe there'll be podcasts that spring up around it.
That's
but,
right.
In any case, just kind of an interesting little tidbit about that. And it also takes place several centuries before the events of Ancillary Justice.
Okay,
so
good to know. Yeah.
it's been written both before, and it was written both before Ancillary Justice, and it also maybe gives us a sense of who Leckie was more than, I guess, almost 2 decades ago now.
Yeah,
and
that's
kind
right.
of what was going through her mind as she started to envision what would eventually become, of course, the Wretch Imperial series.
Yeah. Wow. Very cool. That's actually really excellent context, because as I was reading the short story, I find myself wondering when it's taking place, because it's not super clear.
Totally.
And I was actually getting a bit worried, because I was like, oh my gosh, does this take place like during one of the sequel books that I haven't read yet? Like, am I about to spoil myself on the rest of the series by accident?
Right.
But not to worry. It sounds like this is a prequel series, it's a prequel short story written before Ancillary Justice, and also takes place before Ancillary Justice.
Yes.
Really excellent context. Well, knowing that and keeping that in mind, let me blast through a quick summary of the short story. Again, it's very quick. It's about 20 pages on the Kindle version. So the basic premise of this short story is that we are on a ship, a cargo ship, that is making its way towards Chown, the planet Chown. And we basically follow one of the watchers, one of the security on this ship, named Kel, who befriends one of the passengers, who's named Ott. And through the context of the story, we're basically told that the planet Gown is hidden and safe behind some sort of galactic interference called the Crawl. Ships aren't able to speed their way through it. They have to literally crawl their way through it. We're told that what would normally take a couple of days on a regular ship going at regular speed takes 6 months on a ship going through the Crawl.
Oof.
So the passengers and the security are on this ship. They're making that 6-month journey to Gown. And through the story, we learn that Ott is from the Garantate and is looking for his grandmother, or his grandmother's tribe, back on Gown. That's at least the cover story that we're told up front.
Right.
Kells finds Ott sort of endearing and kind of
unsettling, maybe?
Unsettling, yeah. It's not exactly that he likes Ott immediately. There's an unsettling feeling here as well. And we're told through the backstory that Kells is a watcher because he enlisted years ago after having his heart broken when he wasn't able to marry basically the daughter of a very wealthy tribe.
Yes.
He had a romance with her, and he was basically led on to believe that they would be married because they loved each other. And then the matriarch of this tribe intervened basically and shot down all hopes of marriage.
Right.
So Kells, heartbroken, enlisted, and ever since, he has left the planet and has lived life in space as a watcher on these ships traveling back and forth. The reason Ott is so interesting and unsettling to Kells is he recognizes Odd's look. The eyes, the face structure, the lips, the mouth,
There's something.
they look exactly like those of his lover from many, many years ago. And he makes the kind of bold assumption that this must be like a descendant of her at some
Right.
point.
Right.
Obviously, Kells is much older, and there's like a generational divide between Kells and Ott. And it's clear that Ott is like a descendant, perhaps, of the woman that he loved all those years ago. So there's like this weird fascination with Ott that Kells has throughout the story.
Right.
Unfortunately, as the ship makes its final approach to the planet, 6 months have passed. We learn that Ott is actually a spy for the Raj Empire because the Gowans are deathly afraid that the Raj Empire will expand further and
Right.
try to find its way through the crawl and take them over, as the Raj Empire does, as we know from Ancillary Justice. That is exactly what's happening, in fact, because Ott is a spy for the Raj Empire, and Kells has to confront him and ultimately has to make the really horrifying decision to kill Ott. Even though we learn that Ott is not the first spy that has made its way onto a Gowan ship, and is not the first spy to learn how to get through the crawl. So it seems pretty inevitable that the Raj is going to get what it wants at the end of the day.
Right.
They're going to make their
Right.
way to the crawl, and they're going to take over the Gowans. So all of this kind of seems to be in vain, and Kells sort of understands that too. Like, he did his job, he killed the spy, but by the end of the story, he's in shock as his coworkers try to help him, and he basically just kind of repeats over and over, like, this was pointless, this is all pointless.
Right.
Our jobs as security is pointless. Like, the Raj Empire's already here.
Right.
They've slipped under our noses. And that's where the short story ends. What did you think?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, great summary. This was definitely an interesting one, and I think its length kind of belies how much storytelling that Leckie is able to kind of condense into effectively 20 pages.
Yeah.
And that I was like very impressed by.
Mhm.
Like, I felt like even just reading the first couple pages, I was basically hooked. Like, I was like, okay, this is a little interesting. There's a little bit of a okay, like, I feel like this is a new story. This isn't kind of a remix or some kind of interpretation of other things we've seen in the Ratch universe. And of course, this totally predates the events of Ancillary Justice. But for those reasons, I found it interesting. I found it like kind
Mhm.
of refreshing to like get this story that was set in the same universe and allowed us to see some angles that were not strictly Ratchai, which is basically what we saw for Ancillary
Right.
Justice. Like, we're entirely in their world, more or less, or at least in in the universe kind of post Ratchai sprawl.
Yeah, exactly.
And this being kind of before all of that, and we get to like hear about Anandar as like this like upstart from the Ratchai, and it's like
Mhm.
it's not guaranteed that Anandar will be like this kind of galactic emperor that they eventually become. Like, there's just kind of like little hints and shadows and like kind of murmurings that this like empire is starting to grow and might be a threat to all civilizations in their kind of periphery.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I thought it was pretty great. Like, I really enjoyed this story. There's like lots of little elements I could point to and be like, oh, that's pretty good writing. Like even the description of the 6-month kind of journey.
I loved that.
And that was really great. Yeah, and I want to hear your thoughts about that. Like, there was just so many things just like that I could point to and be like, I liked this. Like, this was like a singular element in this little short story that I enjoyed. And so overall, like, I'm walking away thinking, oh, great little story here.
Yeah. I will say I feel a little bit differently about it.
Yeah.
I really liked Ancillary Justice. This story for me, this short story, is passable. Like I could do without. But
Yeah.
I don't feel like I got so much more from this short story, either from Ann Leckie as a writer. Like you'll recall back when we read The Wandering Earth by Liu Shin.
Right.
I loved that short story because, as we discussed, it's like a microcosm of Liu Shin's writing style and storytelling and sci-fi.
Totally.
Like if you liked Wandering Earth as a short story, almost guaranteed you will like the rest of his work.
Right.
I don't think the same can be said for this short story. Like it doesn't really give me a sense of Ann Leckie as a writer. And I think it actually shares some of the pitfalls and criticisms I had for Ancillary Justice as well, which is interesting, particularly when it comes to plotting and pacing. Like, I think Ann Leckie, just like she did with Ancillary Justice, loves the world building, loves to spend a long time on just like the weird quirks of the universe she's building.
Fair.
In this short story, all the Gowans wear masks that like seem to cover the top half of their faces.
Right. And there's not much kind of explanation of it or other kind of description. Yeah.
There's a lot of references to it, but there's no explanation. It's just part of the world building. Right. Obviously, there's a lot of tea in this fucking story as well. And Leckie loves tea.
She really loves tea.
Literally, the final line of this short story is Kel's being like, "Oh, I'd love a cup of tea." After this traumatic series of events.
Right.
So that would be my primary criticism against this book, and I think Ann Leckie certainly does a much better job with Ancillary Justice and has much, she has a nice 400-page book to really flesh things out and work with the plot and story in a much more interesting way. Here, I think, within the constraints of a 20-page short story, it doesn't quite work for me. The pacing is all over the place.
Yeah.
And the characters aren't as interesting as I'd like. Like, okay, Kel's got his heart broken one time. Like, that's the entire motivation of the character.
Right.
So like the motivations feel a bit paper thin to me for the characters, and the story feels a bit rushed, and there's a lot of time spent on world building, which Ann Leckie clearly loves to do, and not as much time spent on characters or interactions or just plotting,
Yeah.
That is to say, it's not like I hated this short story, and I think for anyone who's interested in more Ann Leckie writing, if you absolutely loved Ancillary Justice, this is a fun little read, and maybe you want to pick this short story collection up. But also, I don't see this short story as mandatory reading that'll increase your appreciation for Ancillary Justice or for Ann Leckie's other work. In the same way that I felt reading Wandering Earth did shape and reshape my perspective on Three Body Problem and Liu Shin's style as an author.
Right.
Speaking of world building, I wanted to ask you about the Vonda scene.
Yes.
Where Kells recounts a story to Ott in one of their conversations. When Kells was a child, he was bitten by a Vonda, which is some sort of like bug, giant mosquito, scary creature thing.
Yeah, seems like a frog.
Is frog what you pictured?
Poisonous. I was picturing a tiny little poisonous frogs. You just reach into a bowl of fruit, and there is a poisonous frog.
Yeah, exactly. Wait, that's so funny. I imagine like a giant. I don't know if you've played Metroid, but I imagine like Metroids, like giant those creatures.
Okay, I remember it. Yes.
Anyway, whatever this creature is, it's native to the Gowan planet.
Right.
And it comes up in conversation, and Kells recounts this story. When he was a kid, he got bit. And when you get bit by the worst kind of Vonda, which is the T-Vonda.
The T-Vonda?
Named because once you get bitten, you basically only have enough time to brew 1 cup of tea before you die. That's how fast acting it is.
The most important thing one could do in their vital moments.
That's how I measure time. How many cups of tea could I have made?
Right. This is the Leckie scale. They call this
it's
the
the
Leckie
Leckie
scale.
scale of time measurement for sure. Everyone's like, Miss Leckie, please, we need you to arrive at 7:30 a.m. for the conference. And she's like,
Yeah. She's like, you mean, is that 3 T's from now?
How
I
many
probably
T's?
could make that. How many T's?
how long will the
until-
conference be?
Right.
Because if it's any more than 4 T's,
Right.
I won't be able
Right.
to, my rate will go up.
Yes.
So this story is told. Kells gets bitten, feels the poison actively working its way up his arm, and basically his sister comes in, grabs the knife that Kells was like hesitating with, and does what he couldn't,
Right.
and chops his fucking arm off
His whole arm off.
to stop the poison from
Yeah.
getting to core organs.
Right.
And it's an interesting story that's recounted in the middle of this short story. It takes up quite a bit of chunk of the 20 pages. So, Opsa, I'm curious what you thought the purpose of this Vonda arm cutting anecdote was in the context of this short story.
Yeah. I mean, like, certainly, at least superficially, it's to kind of illustrate, at least some of the different cultures kind of, at play on this ship, and obviously Kells is meant to be like a security guard. He's like this kind of interstellar, like highway patrolman slash like
Right.
border control. Like it's kind of a weird role.
Right.
But
we don't know how
like,
problematic it quite leans.
Not quite sure yet, like, I'm not sure if he's a baddie, but
Right.
it's,
Is he
like,
separating children from their families? We don't know.
we don't quite know his backstory. So I don't know. I think part of it was to kind of, highlight that, like, in order to be in this role, you need to be supremely tough. And there's some criticism from the other passengers when he tells this story, and they're basically like, what the fuck? You're our security?
Right.
Like, wonder.
She basically, like, not to be crass, but she's just like, dude, you're a pussy. Like,
basically. Yeah. I mean, you
couldn't cut your own arm off when you were dying. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
So there's definitely a little bit of that's happening. But it's kind of like, it's a little thin or kind of basic, but she also did use it to like cue up, Aunt Emney's response during this little exchange.
Yes.
And I'll just kind of, I've got it here. And basically, she like, Kells is being torn into by this passenger
and not defending himself well, to be fair. He's like, okay, you don't have to be mean about it.
Right. And here, I'll just, I guess, I'll quote directly from her just to capture her words here.
Good.
She says, I am now convinced that the Gerentate will fall to Anandar Mianai the moment he turns his attention that way. You are all of you far too sentimental. Cowan as well, despite the crawl and the efforts of the watch. Here she looked directly at Kells.
Incredible. Incredible.
It was lovely. And Kells responds, honored, there's no need to be rude. And she says, I say what I think. My people don't hide behind masks. And this is where Aunt comes in and says, you certainly do.
Oh.
Your mask is rudeness and offensively plain speech. We only see you how you wish to appear, not your true self. Mask or not, Watchman Iraket has been more honest than you.
Yeah.
And I think like that whole scene was basically so she could get that
one singer in. Yeah.
Which, I don't hate, it's like a little bit of a long setup for that payoff, but I ultimately, like, when I'm thinking about it, I'm just kind of like picking this apart a little bit. I think that is why this anecdote was included.
That's fair.
But it also, of course, did tell us about the T Vondas and like the notion of like a quick acting poison.
Right.
The name of this short story is Night's Slow Poison.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting thinking about like the, what the commentary there might be. And of course we have the scene at the end where Iraket is like in shock and, muttering about tea and like, whatever is happening at the end there. But it kind of suggests that, maybe what Kells is thinking is that like, whoa, the Recha Eye are already here. They already have some like technology or like a poison that allows them to put it in this kind of trance, like, and we just forget what's happened. Like maybe they've already been on this ship and I just like have no memory of it.
Totally.
And so I think there's a little bit of like she's Iraket is kind of spiraling down a little bit, but I think like the this scene and the T Vendas and that this question of poison is really kind of a commentary on the Racha Eye, and like,
Ah, that's
it
so
kind of
yeah.
seems like it's a slow dripping poison, but maybe in fact is like a lot faster acting than they in fact realize.
Oh, that's such a good read on it, Opsa. I truly hadn't zoomed out and considered it in that context, especially given what the title of the story is too.
Right.
That's an amazing read on an Opsa. I love that so much, and I'm gonna go ahead and adopt that as well as my interpretation. I love it.
Yeah.
I found the Vonda story to be like I read it multiple times, and every time I was kind of like, what is happening? Why am I hearing about
Yeah.
this like
Right.
bug story? Or sorry, frog story and this guy cutting his arm off because he clearly like regrows it. There's reference to like his two hands earlier in the short
Mm,
story. So, and there's like a throwaway line about like, oh, the doctor can regrow it, so just cut your arm off. It's fine. Don't be
right.
such a baby about it.
Right. Right.
So clearly there's technology that like regrows it. It's not a permanent arm loss, but I love your interpretation and the idea that like what we're exploring here is like the slow poison and the Roch perhaps being the Vonda that's poisoning
Yeah.
the Gowans in this sense.
Right.
I think it also builds a interesting contrast for what Kells does at the end.
Yeah.
When he's a kid, he's not able to act, right? He's not able to make the hard decision to cut his arm off, and his sister has to come in and do it.
Right. Right.
As an adult, when faced with Ott, someone he, you know, doesn't necessarily want to kill,
Yeah.
and he's befriended over these past 6 months on this
Right.
journey,
Right.
he does make the hard decision to fight for his gun back and shoot Ott in the head.
Right.
Even knowing full well that it's kind of pointless, that there's already spies, the Roch have already
Totally.
infiltrated. So I think it also builds like a interesting contrast. Like Kells maybe isn't the big baby guard that we thought he was, or that the woman was making fun of him for. And when push came to shove, he did his job ultimately,
Yeah.
which in my eyes, is an admirable thing for him to do, even in the face of destruction. The last thing I wanted to talk about is the Roch,
Yes.
because I think it's interesting that they're this looming threat. The Gowans are worried about them. The Garantantes are worried about them. It's like the backdrop to every conversation.
Totally.
Like what are the Roch going to do?
Yeah.
I think what's fun, and we clearly see this in Ancillary Justice as well, is just how futile it feels to stand up against the Imperial power.
Right.
And by the end of the story, we know, like, yeah, everything the Gowans have been doing, all of this security, even the crawl,
It's kind of for naught.
it was all for naught.
Yeah.
Like, I really liked how formidable and Leckie is able to make the Roch Empire.
Totally.
Like, truly, you fear an undermine eye, you fear what they're capable of.
Yes.
And I think that's an interesting bit of writing. And of course, we see it much more in depth in Ancillary Justice when
Yeah.
and Leckie explores imperialism and imperialistic powers and their influence and the fallout of standing against them and staying for them, and how the tiniest little decision that might not affect a core world of the Roch could be like utterly devastating for a colony world at the fringes.
Yeah.
And the ripple effects of just like the black hole that imperial powers are, a superpower, a super country
Yeah.
will be a black hole that touches every aspect of everyone's life. There's no
Yeah.
abstaining from,
Right.
even think about our modern world. You can't just not think about America.
Yeah.
You have to. Every corner of this planet has to think about America in some context.
Yeah.
And we see the same in Anne Leckie's universe too.
Yeah. I mean, that's totally true. I mean, like the threat of this kind of like looming superpower, and the way that it kind of affects every aspect of one's life, and even the she does it in this short story as well, but like touching on social hierarchies, and
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
how one's fortunes can like so rapidly change in these kinds of environments, and obviously we saw Kells like experience the greatest heartbreak of his short life.
That's right. That's
So
right.
and so like yeah, social hierarchy, status, and all of the kind of stratified ways that these civilizations have played out. Yeah, it's definitely a theme that is like important and present frequently in Anne Leckie's work. It seems like even at this kind of early stage,
Yeah.
nearly 20 years ago, prior to the writing of Ancillary Justice,
That's
she was
right.
like thinking about this question of like, the interrelations between groups of people and how social hierarchy can kind of affect that conversation, that dialogue.
That's true. That's such a great point. Well, Oaksa, that wraps up our little bonus conversation here today, and that officially wraps up our journey in the Imperial Raj universe with Anne Leckie and Ancillary Justice,
At least for this season.
at least for this season. There are
That's
more
right.
books in the series, and we may choose to revisit them in the future. Again, for folks who might be interested, today we read the short story Night's Slow Poison. It's part of the Lake of Souls short story collection by Anne Leckie. Up next week, in fact, folks,
Oh, yeah.
we're starting a brand new book, All Systems Red, part of the Murderbot Diaries,
Yes.
Hugo Award-winning series by Martha Wells. We've already recorded our episode. We won't say anything about it yet. You'll just have to wait till next week to hear it. We hope you'll be joining us on another great sci-fi read. But until then, we'll see you later.
Till next time.